Okay, so my name is Julie, and I'm going to share about the topic in the title of this video. What brought me to this is I was doing a reading for myself, sort of closing out a cycle and trying to make sure that I understood everything that I needed to understand about it. So asking certain questions of my oracle, which was a very effective method for me to get some clarity and then move some emotion that had been stuck within me on the topic. So I'm really glad I did it. Ultimately, there were so many benefits from the process of what I went through, as there is with any process that we're going through in life, any experience that we're having. It's just a matter of whether we look at it like that or not. In this case, I was mostly looking at it like that in retrospect. But there was just some feeling of like, isn't there something besides the process? Like, isn't there a culmination of something that this leads me to? And yes, there is, but one of the things that I came to, one of the major things that I think it was the cards were pointing out to me, is about my resilience. And I thought, okay, what creates resilience? And I did a quick little Google search, and the AI had a list of things that contribute to, hold on, I don't know if you saw me sneeze or about to sneeze. I tried to pause you to spare you. I did sneeze on my windscreen here. Anyways, the AI had compiled a list of things that contribute to resilience, and they were all making sense to me as I read them. But what I knew glaringly upon reading that list was my resilience was not built on those things. Those things came as part of the process of my resilience, for sure. And maybe I'll pause and grab my phone and mention some of those things in a minute if it seems right. But what I really want to focus on is what I know to be the vital part of what comprised my resilience when I needed it and had none. I know for a fact I wouldn't be where I am today if I had not set myself up this way. And that is that when I started this journey, I didn't know it was going to be a journey. I was just miserable and depressed and agoraphobic and anxious and wanted to die and miserable and traumatized and desperate to escape all the uncomfortable everything that I was experiencing in life. And I was introduced to the movie The Secret. The Secret is a movie that talks about the law of attraction. And I have seen some spiritual teachers really try to deter people from the concepts taught in that movie. And basically, the movie shows how your thoughts become your reality. And the reason why some spiritual teachers want to deter people from focusing solely on that is that it's more a helpful piece of information to integrate in a bigger context and a larger knowing about what you're doing. And if you solely focus on it, you can be in danger of veering yourself off your soul's path because you're only focused on what your ego wants. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that's the gist of the argument for spiritual teachers that say not to focus on it. But I've never agreed with the concept of don't focus on it because I know that it saved my life. Because I was desperate and I had already tried a lot of things, and I'm including, years of therapy, medication, numerous medications, very high doses for years. I had tried electric shock therapy. I went to desperate measures to try to alleviate my situation. And I was not alleviated from my situation because it was trauma. And it was a backlog of trauma that had not yet been processed. And that's why I was weighed down. That's why I couldn't function. That's why my coping mechanisms were all failing, because they were built on everything false about life, the world, and who I am. But I didn't know any of that then. All I knew was that I was uncomfortable and that I wanted to die, and that I was desperate to not feel the way I was feeling. And when I was introduced to the concept of your thoughts create your reality, it caused me to look at my thoughts and say, okay, what are my thoughts? And I noticed that all my thoughts were negative. And so it stood to reason that if it was true that your thoughts create your reality, that it could stand to reason that my thoughts, which were all negative, were creating the negative reality that I was living in. And then upon that realization, I thought, well, I better try and see if this works. I better try to change my thoughts. Now, I had been in counseling, like I said, for, 15 years or something like that. And I had been introduced to the concept of thoughts become feelings, which become behaviors. This triangle, thoughts become feelings, become behaviors. Because I remember one of my therapists, the best one that I had, her name was Joan, she introduced me to that concept and said basically you just need to change one of these things to get results in any of them. And that's a valuable thing to know. Change your thoughts, and that changes how you feel, and then that changes how you act. Or if you can't change your thought, change how you act. Then that will change your thought, and that will change how you feel. Or if you're a person who can't change those things, maybe you can change your feelings. And maybe that will change how you behave, and then that will change how you think. Now, we're all unique beings, and we have different energy that we're experiencing life with and through. So it's nice to know that there's an entry point for all people, But if you've been watching on my channel, you know that I've often focused on two of those things. Actually, three of those things. I think I would have to include three because the behavior aspect comes in when I've asked people to be present with the feelings. So I've talked about acknowledging and then validating self, which is in your thoughts. You're thinking that what you're experiencing is valid and how you feel about it is valid, and then you're acknowledging the feeling and being present with the feeling, which is behavior change. So I've tackled it with all three, apparently, in this formula that I've been talking about for years. But back then, when I was first introduced to the law of attraction, and I first realized that there might be something to it, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that thoughts, feelings, behavior thing, and I didn't even tie it together at that point. For some reason, in this video, I'm doing it. I had thoughts about it the other day, so I touched on that here. We'll see how it ties in later, if at all. Let me get back to my timeline here where I was deciding that I needed to experiment with changing my thoughts. okay? Because I noticed that if my thoughts become my reality and my thoughts are all negative, what can I do to change my thoughts? So every time I had a thought, now by this time I was fully agoraphobic. I was not leaving my bed. It had been years in that state. So I had time on my hands to examine my thoughts and to be with my thoughts and to hear my thoughts. And what I started doing was changing my thoughts. So I would recognize a thought, hear myself think. And then I would say, okay, well, what are 3 ways that the opposite is true? Because my thought was negative, so I was trying to turn it to the positive. So I would look for 3 ways the opposite was true. Okay? So I did that for a bunch of thoughts. And then after a while, I noticed that there were thoughts that came back, even if I did that. Some of them went away, but some of them came back. Now here's where I'm noticing that there are loops, repeating thoughts, loops of thought that are not alleviated just by thinking a different thought, right? Here's where the thought has turned into a belief, and it's been lodged in us with a feeling. So I didn't know that then, but I know now, because I know how it works now, because I've untangled them now. This is years later. We're talking about, I don't know, I'm 10, 12 years out. And now I understand that, the ones that were repeating were actually ones that I had thought so much that I believed them. So they weren't just going away with some logic. And they were lodged in with an emotion, a feeling that hadn't been processed. So those ones I would have to repeatedly wrestle back then, because I didn't know these other concepts about being lodged in with feelings, and I didn't know that it was considered a belief because it was repeating. So I still worked on them, because one way that you can change your beliefs is through repetition. So we know now that there are much easier, faster ways to change your beliefs by moving and connecting the hemispheres of your energy body at the same time as you're moving the energy of the belief. And that makes it happen a lot quicker. But if you don't know that and you just repeat the belief that you'd prefer, eventually that will program in your subconscious. Repetition is not only a symptom of the belief, it is also a way to program in the belief. So some of the thoughts, I would have to wrestle them over and over and over again, the same thought. So repetition did work for me, though. So you'll see what I'm talking about is, I started from scratch, basically, reprogramming my consciousness and my subconscious eventually. And just my operating system and how I handled my everyday process of thinking and being alive and experiencing life. It was very tedious in the beginning. But the only reason I did it was because I had seen this Law of Attraction movie, The Secret, and I wanted to see if it was true. And I hadn't seen that it wasn't true yet. So as I wrestled these thoughts and I started to be able to think some more positive thoughts, my life started to change. And there would be times where I was not in that suffering place and I could just enjoy some nice feeling thoughts that were positive. And things started to happen that were positive in my life, whereas it was very noticeable when some positive things started happening because there had been so much negativity for so long, or at least that's the only thing I had been noticing, because that's where my mind focused. And once I was changing the way I focused, or changing my perspectives of life, the experience that I had of life also changed. Now this made me realize that it was true, that my thoughts do become my reality. Now I also did find that it's not as simple as thinking, I want to be rich over and over again, and then you're suddenly rich. Okay? Like I also understood that eventually I understood that even though I was getting good results on some things, other things I couldn't quite get to shift. But I always understood that that was something tied to either my soul's intention. I don't think I always understood that part, but I always understood that it was tied to something in my subconscious that I didn't realize was there. And then eventually I realized that it could also be tied to my soul's intention, meaning those two energies are also influencing what my reality is. It's not just my conscious thoughts. So it's not necessarily true that your thoughts create your reality, period. But it is true that your thoughts create your reality. And also your soul's intention creates your reality. And also your subconscious, the things that you're not even thinking anymore because they're already programmed in, creates your reality. The dominant vibration that you have is what's going to be lived out as your reality, right? So, but back then, early days, like I said, I was pretty desperate because I wanted to die every day, and I was really depressed, and I was so uncomfortable all the time in pain, emotional pain and physical pain, because it had manifested into, fibromyalgia and all that kind of stuff. So I was in pain and, digestive issues, and I had my gallbladder removed, and the surgeon said there was over 100 small black stones. And he said, that was unusual. And so it wasn't like, it was whatever. Anyway, I was in such a vibration of suffering and negativity for so long that it did manifest in physical ailments back then, as it will. It has to get our attention somehow, and it has to get louder if we don't pay attention to it. And we have to be kind of put into a restful state so that we'll notice our thoughts more, that we'll notice patterns. The human mind is designed to notice patterns. That's something that will help us out in this, right? So anyway, there I was realizing, okay, I've been thinking everything negative, but if I think positive things, my life gets more positive. I better change the way I think. And then I realized, okay, I need to set out to do this, right? And I knew that at some point there there were, it didn't happen overnight. This was a step-by-step process completely, and at different stages I understood different things. Eventually I was introduced to the mirror concept by watching a Greg Braden talk on YouTube. It's like 3 hours long, and he talks about the 7 Essene mirrors. That was a fascinating piece of information for me to absorb or remember, because I understood then that the things that I saw outside of me as negative, I could look for those inside of me and then do some work that way. And I'm not suggesting that everything you see outside of you is a direct reflection of you, okay? But for me, at that time, I could always find a reflection of the things that I saw outside. And another concept that was really helpful and vital was the Kabbalion, the Hermetic principles. Eventually I was a match to understanding the Hermetic principles, and it was like, it kind of had this bigger picture view of how what I was doing was working. Like there's like physics and stuff going on here, right? And it's more than just what's been proven by science, is what I was realizing. And so I just got to realize how vital and important it was for me to reprogram my subconscious. Oh, another key piece of information that I had come across early days was Bruce Lipton's work. He talks about epigenetics. And if you've never heard of Bruce Lipton, I highly recommend checking him out. He is a doctor, and he was teaching doctors to be doctors. And he actually was also doing research in a lab and stumbled upon the information that our environment was actually one of the factors that programs us. It's not just our DNA. And this was something that was difficult for that doctor community to learn because it took the legs out of everything that they had been teaching and going by. So unfortunately, Dr. Bruce Lipton had a tough time getting that information out, but thankfully he went on his own and started distributing it and showing people. And he's given many talks, and there are some on YouTube. And he basically talked about how during the first 7 years of life, the human baby, or the human child, is in the theta phase, which is a phase where they are like a sponge, downloading all of their information from their environment and learning how to survive in their environment. So it didn't take much for me to understand that what I was doing was dealing with the cleanup of the environment that I had grown up in. And I already knew that the environment I grew up in was very dysfunctional. That was like a no-brainer for me, very obvious because of all the chaos that ensued around me on a constant basis, and how terrified I was, and how, traumatized I was from many experiences of my childhood, which included a lot of violence, a lot of lack, a lot of chaos, hysterics, tragedy. And it was something where I was realizing that what I was seeing in my life and what I was experiencing was just the programming that I had, all like being lived out, simply because it was still in me. I had absorbed it from my environment. So my thoughts creating my reality was the thoughts and the beliefs that I had been programmed with due to the environment I grew up in, which was very chaotic and very traumatizing. So I understood then that what I was doing was reprogramming that. So what all that culminated to when it comes to resilience is that in the beginning, I had so many triggers that the reason I had become reclusive was because I couldn't deal with any part of life without being triggered. And when I say being triggered, a trigger means that you get activated in the wound of your past and you experience the unprocessed emotion again. But because you may not be equipped to process it still, you just experience it just like you did the first time as a perhaps scared child. Whatever age you were when the initial trauma happened is what plays out, and you play it out from that perspective unless you gain a dual consciousness, and then you're able to parent yourself through something like that, which for me came much later. In the beginning days, when I was having all these triggers, what would happen is I would be triggered, and then I would panic, and I would be in that childlike state of panic and fear. And then afterwards, I would realize that was what happened, right? After the trigger deactivated, after I'd already felt the terror again and lived through it, and maybe even reacted in it, maybe even acted badly in it. Then I would go, oh, okay, that was me in a trigger. And now let me look at that trigger and see what's programmed in me, see what thoughts I had to create that as my reality. And I would start deconstructing the triggers. And when I say I could even react in the triggers, it would be something like, getting mad at somebody who triggered me. maybe yelling at them, maybe lashing out at myself, or feeling a bunch of emotions that weren't appropriate for the situation I was in, like shame or, humiliation or fear, and I knew that it wasn't really me. At that point, I knew it was just the way I got programmed. I knew it was like, I'm just replaying this stuff. It's not really me, and I gotta get free of it. But, looking back, I have to admit, it took me years and years and years of doing it myself, by myself, with no support. Actually, I did for a couple times have a couple different people, but these were occasional things where I got to speak to somebody and share or reflect about something I was going through. For no long period of time out of the 10 years I've been doing shadow work did I have someone to work with. The most was maybe for 3 months, one every other week or something. That was it, because I had stopped my talk therapy because it hadn't helped me. And I was doing this on my own at that point. So where resilience came in for me was I got to a point where I would be triggered. When I would know, okay, if I'm going to get triggered, I want to remember that, it's just a trigger while I'm in the trigger. And I would put up signs in my bedroom for me, to remind me, you are loved, you are safe, just to remind me that, remember when you weren't in a trigger and you felt okay? Like, because my triggers would take me back to a place of wanting to die, like for so many years. I just turned 49, so that's only 9 years ago. Every day of my life up to then, from 15 to 40, I experienced the trigger of wanting to die. And there are reasons for that that directly tie into my past and what I experienced around suicide and things like that, which I don't need to go into detail on this in this video, but I'm just saying, like, even that was programmed in response from my environment that I was reliving. And I knew it. But it's a long time to work on it, right? But I was scared not to. And that's where my resilience comes in. Because if I didn't do it, no one was coming to save me. No one else was going to do it for me. And I was miserable. And I knew that if I let myself slip back into that negative way of thinking and feeling, that it was a self-perpetuating cycle, that that's where I would live. And I couldn't bear that. So, oddly enough, I programmed myself with fear to engage myself in a resilient process. Meaning I knew that it would be a lot worse if I didn't do the work. And that's why I stayed resilient. And I'm not kidding. Even like a couple years ago, I can remember being in a trigger and just having that wave come over me of feeling like I want to give up and like it's, fuck everything, and all these feelings that you can have when you're triggered about hopelessness and, being defeated and all this negative stuff. And then being so scared in the next moment and going, oh no, if I let myself think that way, I'll never come out of it. I'll lose everything. I'll lose everything. I've worked so hard for it again, and that is positive in my life, that is working for me. And so that is when I think I recognized that I had a fear virus that was perpetuating me towards resilience. I was more scared not to do it. I was more scared not to do it than to do it. That's where my resilience came from. And there are a lot of other things about resilience that the AI mentioned, which are really valuable. So I'm going to grab the list and we'll just at least touch on those things. because I have titled this Resilience. And if you've come here, thinking that you want another perspective on resilience, let's really talk about it. Because there are some things that I recognize that are valuable that I have adopted along the way, and maybe I can identify where I got them from. All right, one moment. Okay, so this is just the AI overview when I did a Google search. Resilience is a psychological quality that comes from a variety of factors, including cognitive flexibility, the ability to flexibly attend to and disengage from effective information, which helps regulate stress. And just the ability to change your mind, of course, right? If you're in one of the repetitive loops, it's much more difficult to just change your mind without doing the steps that I've talked about in a lot of my other videos. So you acknowledge how you're feeling, what it is repeating, whether it's a feeling, behavior, or thought. You acknowledge it. Oh, this is repeating. I'm doing this again. Validate why you're doing it. That means you're going to understand yourself, meaning there's a reason. You're not just making it up for no reason. It's not just, maybe it's ignorance that causes you to cope in that way, but it's a coping mechanism, and or strategy, or behavior. So it's there for a reason. So let's validate that it's there for a reason. Understand yourself on why it's there. One of the things that I've noticed in dysfunctional relating that can go on in our society sometimes is that we look outside of ourselves for validation. And I think it's a dangerous thing, because you can really get stuck in looking for that validation. And, I guess I had the good fortune to grow up amongst people who will never validate me. And so in order to engage in the process of healing for myself, I had to start validating myself. And the day that I started giving myself permission to do that was a life-changing day. And so glad I did it, and I highly recommend. Because you're the only one with your experience and your perspective. And that's what you're here to have, is your experience and your perspective. You're not here to have someone else's experience and someone else's perspective, and they're not here to have yours. So you best validate your own. That's why you're here, It's like that's your whole job. To, at the very least, support yourself in the way of validating your own perspective and experiences. You can be wrong. You're allowed to, right? When we grow up in punishment and reward parenting styles, we can be scared to be wrong. We can be afraid that we'll be punished, and it could be subconscious. We might be afraid to be made fun of because we don't have the right answer, and it's ridiculous. And we need to break those patterns, right? Those beliefs and those thoughts are worthy of breaking down and releasing ourselves from, because they really inhibit this self-validation step, which is so vital in moving forward as sovereign beings who can take responsibility for ourselves. So yeah, changing your mind after you validate yourself, then you're going to let's see, acknowledge, validate, accept where you're at. Like, okay, well, this is it. This is my experience, or this is where I'm at. This is why I'm here. In this, experience I'm having, this is why I'm experiencing it this way, because this is what I've thought about it, and this is what's happened to me, and, accept it. So that means you're not pushing it away, you're not wishing it was different, you're not blaming anyone, you're just accepting. This is where you're at. This doesn't mean you agree with it having happened or want it to happen more or anything like that. Just accepting that this is where you're at. And what you do when you do that is you release the resistance from it. So you're no longer kind of holding it at bay, which means the energy is going to be able to start flowing the way that it needs to in order to move. Because remember, it's stuck there in a loop with the resistance. And the thing that's gluing it there, yeah, you're holding it at bay, but what's gluing it there is the feeling that's associated with it. So the feeling will be associated with the story you told about it. story of your experience, the perspective you had for the experience you had. And maybe you say, oh, I've felt this feeling so many times. Well, I'm asking you to feel it in such a way that you are allowing it to be with you, welcoming it in, not pushing it away, not wishing it was different, not shaming, not blaming, not trying to make it rush, acting like you're the parent to it and it's a 5-year-old and it can just be with you however long it wants. And what this does is, because you're no longer in resistance, you're opening up your central channel, and now you're inviting that energy to be moved into your central channel because you've got no resistance and you're welcoming it to be with you. And your central channel will move it eventually when it's ready. When you become the version of yourself that is capable of processing that feeling, that's when the feeling moves. So you let it be with you until you are that version, but you're not doing it so that it will move. You're doing it because you're integrating it into you and becoming the version of yourself that can process that feeling. So you just invite this feeling in. Those are the steps. It's really that simple. Okay, then we've got emotional resilience. The ability to respond to stressful situations and crisis with a sense of perspective, which helps overcome negative feelings. I think this is really important, but as far as being a component of resilience, sure, you have to take care of your emotional body, right? And this is sort of saying, like, to have a perspective which allows you to kind of make sense of it. So there are perspectives where we'll make sense of a situation by putting ourselves in the victim role, meaning like, oh, that bad thing happened to me, or oh, that person did this wrong to me, right? And I'm not saying it's wrong to do that, but there's another perspective called the growth mindset. And this is a perspective, you can look into it further and see how it sits with you. Because I feel like it was a rough transition from talking about victim mindset going to growth mindset directly without bridging you there. I wasn't trying to make this a real long video. I guess we could do a longer video on that at some point. If you are interested, let me know and I will talk about it more. But for now, I just want to point out that the growth mindset means that you have the perspective that whatever you're going through, you'll grow through. So you're going to learn your lesson. You're going to learn, you're going to take your blessings. You're going to grow as a person who is having experiences which are sometimes challenging. And it's this perspective which lends towards a resilience instead of a perspective that allows you to be in a defeated sort of sense about life because you faced a challenge. And the way that we look at challenges and how we experience them is going to have a lot to do with how we were programmed in our childhood and how our family handled challenges. That our families say that we were victims and we were down and out and we were poor and life wasn't fair. And if we were taught to think that way, it's no wonder that we think that way. But this is pointing out to us that if we work on that alone, is just allowing ourselves to open up to a growth mindset, that right there is going to help us build resilience greatly. They mention coping strategies, cognitive and behavioral strategies to manage stressful events. And coping strategies is a lot of what we're coming out of when we do this work, when we reprogram ourselves. Like, to me, being resilient was, I'm being resilient from coping mechanisms I've been living with. I'm being resilient as I come out of those. But it's absolutely true that I still used coping mechanisms to get through, right? Like watching a movie, like having a really comfortable, cuddly place to do your crying in. Just whatever gives you a safe container, because A safe container is the only place you're going to be able to do this formula that I've talked about. When you get really good and you're all caught up and you feel really confident, you'll be able to do it in real time. But if you have a backlog and you're dealing with your whole history and you haven't done any of this yet, you're going to want a safe space to do it in. So it's really important to have those things. Oh, another coping strategy that I had was watching Gilmore Girls. I haven't watched it in years now, but I used to watch it for years on repeat. Just that show. And it was just wholesome and it was comforting and I liked it, and it depicted, these characters, which I felt like I got to know. And, it was just, and then come to find out there's this whole community who has done the same thing. It's crazy. So, you know what yours is, and it's good to have those, and it can help with resilience according to this list. Self-worth and self-confidence, of course, developing strong self-efficacy, self-worth and self-confidence can help with resilience. Yeah, because if you know you're worth it, then you're going to get back up. And if you don't know you're worth it, you're less apt to get back up. To be honest, self-worth has been the hardest thing for me, and it's like one of the last things, that I'm getting really good at. So, 10 years of doing the work has brought me to a place where I can finally start to say, oh yeah, I do have value. I see my worth. So it's hard for me to say, like, start out with that, but another person may be able to start out with that, Communication skills. Having strong communication skills can help with resilience. If you can advocate for yourself, if you can express yourself, if you are stifled in communication, or if you have ineffective communication skills, and so every time you try to communicate with somebody else it comes out wrong, or they misunderstand, or you don't bother to try to be understood, of course that those kind of things are going to wear you down. And maybe there's a school of thought that says if you can express to somebody you trust and all of that, it can help you be resilient, but I didn't have that experience, so I can't advocate for that. An action plan. An action plan, what it brings to my mind is when I put those signs up on my walls and, just was prepared for when I needed to be reminded that I'm going to be okay, that this is a temporary situation I'm in, that I'm moving through some energy and it feels really scary, but I know there's another time where I've remembered that I'm safe and I'm loved and I'm okay. And a clear, focused mind can help with resilience. Well, yeah, when you are equipped to look for the solution in any challenge that you're facing, that's resilience. It's the same as a growth mindset, really. It's when you are willing to know that there's a solution for every problem that you're facing and that you are willing to be open to it. And if you are not, then you're not going to line up with it. Because if you think there's no solution, then you're not going to line up with the solution. So having the perspective and the mindset that there is a solution and that you are open to it is very helpful with resilience. I can attest to that. Reaching out for support. See, it's makes sense to me logically, but I rarely did that, if ever, maybe a handful of times in 10 years. And I think I regretted it most of those times. So, like I said, I did it alone. I don't think everyone has to do it alone. If you have support, even if it's your guides or your cards or, your parents, forum online, whatever it is. I did have different things at different times sometimes, like those things. Okay, so that's, again, just the AI, and I think those were things that I could relate to, a lot of them. This article in the New York Times starts out from 2020, says an individual's resilience is dictated by a combination of genetics, personal history, environment, and situational context. And of course that's true. When we look at Bruce Lipton's research, it shows that we're programmed to our environment. because we're getting primed to survive in the environment that we're born into, the family we're born into. So of course that's going to dictate how resilient we are. And like I said, if our family was, programmed to be like, woe is us, life isn't fair, all this kind of stuff, we're going to be programmed that way too. So those are some of the first things you can tackle when you're changing beliefs, in order to help yourself get on a path to actually doing the work, sticking with it, remembering that you can do it, remembering that's what you are doing, remembering how to do it, all of those kind of things. Because basically these looping patterns, they can really hijack us, and we can, forget that there's another way in those moments. And when we have so many of the things from the past that are unprocessed, and we're just reacting in life and getting triggered, and we don't have any room for anything else, it can be very, very difficult, and it can seem hopeless and pointless and all of that. But maybe I'm not saying that you should do the experiment that I did to see if your thoughts create your reality, so that you can train yourself into fearfully being resilient, because you know it'll be worse if you're not. But here's my story. It's true, it's tried for me, and it's how I got here. And I'm so thankful. And I'm so thankful that the people that were against the Law of Attraction movie The Secret, I'm so thankful they didn't have a say on whether or not that movie was released, because it really did save my life. And I extracted what I needed from it, and I started doing something to help myself in the smallest, most tedious steps of changing my thoughts one at a time and wrestling them repeatedly when I needed to. I mean, it was like that for me, all the way to now, where if I want, I can have space in my head, I enjoy analyzing and thinking about things and stuff like that. But to be honest, I know that that's not where it's at for me. I know that above that is the spaciousness where the downloads come in, and the epiphanies, the brilliant genius ideas and concepts, and that is open to me now, whereas when I was, starting out, it was constant negative thoughts of misery and suffering, and I wanted to end, and not knowing that I could actually clear it and end the suffering for myself. And that's amazing to me, you know? So, yeah. And I think it's interesting for me to look back and now and realize that, one of the things that I'm doing when I'm reprogramming my subconscious, because it's programmed to the environment I grew up in, is I'm eliminating fear programs, because that's what I grew up in, circumstances that caused me to behave based on fear, and decide how to cope based on fear. So those are the things I have to undo, because if fear is part of the base, then it's going to crumble. It's not truth. Fear is not who we really are. So anything based in fear isn't going to last. It's going to cause ill effects. So even though those are the things that I'm actually, going after and changing as I do this process, this journey of healing, putting in a fear of not being resilient actually served me. So I kind of twisted it around there and used the fear for what it was worth for me, which was to keep me motivated and moving forward, which is kind of an interesting and I think brilliant thing for me to have done. It's probably one of the most clever uses of fear that I've ever experienced or used for myself. So interesting for me to realize that today. All right, that is my share on on resilience, and how I used fear to program in resilience, and that was the most effective way for me to have resilience in the beginning. And eventually it became growth mindset, And now it's pretty easy. I don't want to say never, that there will never be a time where I don't immediately go towards what's the solution for this problem. But it's been a while since I didn't go towards, oh, what's the solution to this problem I have? And that is so different from me that started this journey. And it's such a more pleasant way to live. Have you had any experiences like this where you notice changes in yourself and you've been doing this work yourself? What is your experience? If you'd like to share any, I'm open to it, and let me know if you have any questions.